Hello, 안나 카레니나 세 번째 시간입니다. Matvey, he said, shaking his head. Don't worry, sir, said Matvey. It'll all come right. Come right? Yes, sir. You think so? Who's that? Asked Oblonsky, hearing the rustle of a woman's dress behind the door. It's me, sir, said a firm, present, feminine voice, and Matryona Filimonovna's stern, pock-marked face was thrust in at the door. Well, what is it? Oblonsky asked, advancing toward the door. Though Oblonsky was entirely in the wrong as regard his wife, and was aware of it himself, everyone in the house, even the nurse, Rory's best friend, was on his side. Well, what is that? He repeated dejectedly. You'd better go down, sir, and tell her again how sorry you are. Perhaps the good Lord will make her change her mind. She is terribly upset, sir, and it's a pitiful to see her. And besides, sir, everything is turned upside down. You must take pity on the children, sir. Tell again how sorry you are, sir. What's to be done, sir? There's no laws without. But she won't see me. But you will have done your part, sir. The Lord is merciful. Pray to him, sir. Pray to him. Oh, all right. You can go now, said Oblonsky, blushing suddenly. Well, let's get dressed, he said, turning to Matvey and throwing down his dressing gown determinedly. Matvey, blowing off some invisible speck, held up the shirt, which he gathered up like an horse's collar, and with evident satisfaction put it on his master's well-tended body. Chapter 3. Having dressed, Oblonsky sprayed himself with eau de cologne, pulled down his cuffs with a customary movement, distributed in different pockets cigarettes, wallet, matches, his watch with its double chain, and seals, and shaking out his handkerchief and feeling clean, scented, physically fit, and cheerful in spite of his misfortune, he went with a slight tremor in each leg into the dining room where his coffee was already waiting for him. Beside the coffee lay his letters and papers from the office. He read the letters. One was a very unpleasant one from merchant who was negotiating the purchase of a wood on his wife's estate. This wood had to be sold, but there could be no question of it until a reconciliation could be effected with his wife. The most unpleasant aspect of it was that a financial consideration had crept into his impending reconciliation with his wife, and the idea that he might be influenced by self-interest, that he might seek a reconciliation with his wife in order to sell this wood, was repugnant to him. Having finished with the letters, Oblonsky drew toward him the papers from his office, rapidly ran through two of them, made a few notes with a large pencil, and, pushing them aside, started on his coffee. While drinking his coffee, he unfolded the morning paper, which was still damp, and began to read. Oblonsky took and read the liberal paper, not an extreme liberal paper, but one that expressed the views of most people, and although he was not really interested either in science, art, or politics, his views on all these matters were strictly in conformance with the view of the majority and those of his paper. He changed them only when the majority changed theirs, or rather he did not change them, but they changed imperceptibly of their own accord. Oblonsky did not choose his politics or opinions, but these seems to come to him of their own accord, just as he did not change the style of his hat or coat, but always wore those that were in fashion, living in a certain social environment and feeling the need for some form of mental activity, which usually arises in a person of mature years. To hold views was unnecessary to him as to wear a hat. If he had a reason for preferring the Liberal to the Conservative Party, to which many of his circle also belonged. It was not because he considered the liberal outlook more rational, but because it corresponded more closely to his way of life. The Liberal Party maintained that everything in Russia was bad, and indeed, Oblonsky had many debts, and most decidedly not enough money. The Liberal Party maintained that marriage was an obsolete institution and that it was necessary to reform it. And indeed, family life gave Oblonsky very little pleasure and forced him to tell lies and dissemble, which was so contrary to his nature. The Liberal Party maintained, or rather assumed, that religion was only a curve on the more barbarous parts of the population, and indeed Oblonsky could not stand through even a short church service without aching feet, and he could not understand what was the point of all those dreadful, high-flown words about the other world when life in this world was so very present. At the same time, Oblonsky, who liked a good joke, found it very amusing times to shock a mild individual with the suggestion that if one was going to pride oneself on one's birth, one needn't stop at Rurik, the Bavarian chief invited by the Slav to rule over them and repudiate one's earliest ancestor, the ape. Liberalism had become a habit with Oblonsky, and he enjoyed his newspaper as he enjoyed his after-dinner cigar for the slight haze that it produced in his head. He read the leading article, which declared that it was quite ridiculous in our time to raise the cry that radicalism threatened to swallow up all the conservative elements, and then demand that the government should take measures for the suppression of the hydra of revolution, but that, on the contrary, in our opinion, the danger lies not in an imaginary, revolutionary hydra, but in a perverse cling to tradition, which hinders progress, and so on. He also read another article on finance in which Bandam and Mail were mentioned and subtle attacks were made on the ministry. With his natural quickness of perception, he understood the point of every stinging remark, where it came from, for whom it was intended, and what had provoked it. And this, as usual, gave him a certain amount of satisfaction. But today his satisfaction was spoiled by the recollection of Matryona's advice and the fact that things at home were far from satisfactory. He went on to read that Count Based was said to have left for Wiesbaden, that there was no need to have gray hair, that a light carriage was for sale, and that a young person offered her services. But these bits of information did not give him the quiet, ironical pleasure that they used to before. Thank you. See you next time.